There are moments that seem harmless, minutes we assume we have an endless lifetime to waste. But only when we lose them do we finally understand that time has never favored anyone. In the American Midwest lived a young man who believed time was something he could spend without limit. But after one snowy night and an encounter that appeared accidental with a solitary old farmer, his life took a completely different turn. And if you think this is just another moral story, prepare yourself, because what happened next will make you rethink your own life and the way you use every precious second you have. Ethan Walker, 20 years old, lived in a small town in Kansas. Ethan wasn't lacking intelligence. In fact, he had a sharp memory, quick reflexes, and teachers who once believed he could achieve anything if he put his mind to it. But that was exactly the problem. Ethan never put his mind to anything. He procrastinated. He procrastinated to the point where his mother sometimes wondered if he truly understood that life doesn't wait for anyone. Every day, Ethan woke up late, dragging himself from bed with the belief that he was still young and had plenty of time to fix his life. He kept telling himself he would start trying someday, but that someday never seemed to come. His father died in a farming accident when he was 14. Since then, it had just been Ethan and his mother, Claire Walker, a strong, resilient woman who had grown exhausted from worrying about her son. Ethan knew she had hopes for his future, but he brushed them aside, convinced that things would eventually fall into place. But nothing in life falls into place unless we make it happen. Ethan had failed the mechanical training certification twice. The second time, he received the results while standing among friends who had passed long ago. The shame felt like a slap to his pride, which was already worn thin. But instead of reflecting on his failures, Ethan did what he always did. He promised himself he would study again tomorrow. Yet tomorrow never truly arrived. When Ethan walked home through the chilly evening fog that day, his mother stood waiting at the door. She didn't scold or criticize him. She simply sighed and said something that chilled Ethan more than the cold wind. She told him life would not wait for him, and if he kept living like this, one day he would wake up and realize he had wasted his entire youth. That day, Claire proposed something Ethan didn't expect. She suggested he spend a few days helping out at Harrison's farm. Old Farmer Harrison lived on the outskirts of town, known for being disciplined and strict. Rumors said he once had a wealthy past but lost everything because of one major mistake. Ethan didn't believe the rumors, but he agreed to go, partly to ease his mother's worry, partly because he himself sensed that his life was stuck in the same place for far too long. The next morning, Ethan was expected at the farm by 6. But Ethan, being Ethan, he arrived long after sunrise, when the town was already fully awake. As he stepped into the farmyard, Harrison was standing beside the horse barn, his deep, weathered eyes seeming to look straight through Ethan. He didn't ask why Ethan was late. He only said one sentence, softly spoken but heavy enough to leave Ethan speechless. Harrison told him he had just thrown away 3 golden hours of his life without even realizing it. Ethan scoffed, thinking the old man was being dramatic, but that tiny scoff made Harrison look at him with a disappointment that cut deeper than any lecture. It was the kind of look that forced Ethan to acknowledge the truth he'd been avoiding for years. Harrison assigned him a simple task: reorganize the storage shed and clean the tools. But Ethan worked slowly, half-heartedly. From a distance, Harrison observed quietly, shaking his head now and then. That irritated Ethan. He wasn't doing anything wrong, he just wasn't rushing. But something in the old man's demeanor made Ethan feel he wasn't only wasting Harrison's time, he was wasting his own life. Later that afternoon, when Ethan prepared to leave, Harrison called him back and asked him a strange question. He asked whether Ethan knew what kind of person he wanted to become. Ethan had no answer. Truthfully, he had never seriously thought about his future. Harrison looked at him and said, A person who doesn't know who they want to become will lose far more than they realize. Ethan left frustrated, but the old man's words haunted him through the night. He felt as though he had stepped onto a path he wasn't ready for, yet something inside him was shifting. The next morning, Ethan returned to the farm. This time, he arrived on time not because he had changed, but because Harrison's words echoed too loudly in his mind. What he didn't know was that a massive snowstorm was approaching, one that would trap him at the farm and push him into a discovery that would change his life forever. From that night on, Ethan Walker would never see time the same way again. The snowstorm swept in faster than any weather report predicted. While Ethan was helping Harrison pull the last bales of hay into the barn, the wind howled so violently that the doors of the livestock shed shook as if they might rip off their hinges. The sky darkened within minutes. Heavy sheets of snow lashed against Ethan's face, stinging sharply, forcing him to squint his eyes shut. Harrison looked up at the clouds for a long moment before turning to Ethan and saying he would not be able to return home that night. The roads would be blocked, and traveling during a blizzard was far too dangerous. Ethan had no choice but to stay. He followed the old man into the large storage barn behind the house. Inside, the warm glow of a lantern cast golden reflections on the wooden walls. The air smelled of old timber, hay, and something else, time itself. Ethan hadn't paid attention to this place the day before. But now, stepping inside, he felt as though he had entered a different world entirely. Tools hung neatly on the walls, each cared for despite their age. In one corner sat several old wooden chests, covered in dust and marked by years of wear. Harrison walked toward one of the chests, a dark wooden one with a missing keyhole. With a slight push of his foot, he slid it forward and brushed a layer of dust from the lid. Then he looked at Ethan with an unreadable expression. He said that since they were trapped in the storm, Ethan might as well spend the time learning something that most people only understand when it's already too late. He opened the chest. Inside was a small gray fabric pouch, worn and heavy. Harrison placed it in Ethan's hands. Ethan eyed him questioningly. The old man gestured for him to open it. When Ethan poured the contents onto the table, more than 30 small black stones scattered across the surface. They looked rough, dull, worthless. Ethan frowned, expecting something meaningful. But Harrison simply told him to take the stones outside into the snowy yard. While waiting for the storm to ease, he wanted Ethan to throw each stone out into the snow. Ethan found the idea strange, but he followed instructions. He stepped outside, the snow thick enough that within minutes, it covered the ground in a pristine white layer. Ethan picked up a stone and tossed it far into the night. It disappeared instantly, swallowed by the darkness and the storm without a single sound. Ethan glanced back at Harrison through the open doorway. The old man stood silently, watching him with an expression that seemed more observant than judgmental. Ethan threw another stone, and another. Soon, the repetitive motion lulled him into a mechanical rhythm. He didn't see the point. He assumed Harrison only wanted to keep him occupied. Yet, the storm raged on, urging him to continue. As he reached into the pouch, he felt only a single remaining stone. He pulled it out, preparing to throw it like the rest. But just as his arm lifted, the lantern's golden light cut across the yard, catching the surface of the stone. A sudden blue flash glimmered against the snow. Ethan froze. He lowered the stone, raising it closer to his eyes. And at that moment, his breath caught. It wasn't a stone at all. It was a sapphire. A breathtaking, deep blue sapphire that shimmered with an inner glow even through the storm's darkness. A surge of panic rushed through Ethan. His hands trembled as he opened the empty pouch again, desperately hoping he had missed others. But no, the pouch was empty. The 29 stones he had thrown into the raging storm were gone forever, buried under layers of snow and darkness. He sprinted back into the barn, face pale, eyes wide. Placing the sapphire onto the table, he demanded an explanation. Why would Harrison let him throw away gemstones? Why would he set him up to lose something so valuable? The truth hit harder than any scolding. Harrison didn't raise his voice. He didn't look angry. Instead, he looked deeply sad, as though he were watching his own past unfold again through Ethan's hands. He explained that many years ago, he had inherited a large estate and considerable wealth. Among those assets was a pouch full of real sapphires. But he was young, careless, and trapped in the belief that time and opportunities were limitless. He wasted years drifting, making excuses, postponing responsibilities, believing he could always fix things tomorrow. By the time he realized how wrong he had been, most of his wealth was gone. His family left, his friends drifted away, and his once thriving farm fell into ruin. Only a few sapphires remained in that pouch, symbols of everything he had lost. Ethan listened in stunned silence. Harrison's voice trembled when he said that the sapphires Ethan had thrown weren't meant to deceive him. They were meant to teach him what Harrison once learned far too late. He said each stone represented a day in Ethan's life. Ethan had tossed each one away mindlessly, assuming there was nothing valuable about them, just as he had been doing with his time for years. The snowstorm roared outside, but inside the barn, an even stronger storm swirled inside Ethan's heart, his eyes fixed on the lone sapphire left on the table. The single stone felt impossibly heavy now, not because of its monetary worth, but because of its meaning. Harrison said softly that most people go through life throwing away their sapphires without ever seeing their glow. They live with the illusion that time is plentiful, and only when the final sapphire remains do they finally recognize the treasure they've wasted. He told Ethan that he had been given a rare gift. He had seen the light of the last sapphire before it was too late. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. The howl of the wind outside felt like a reminder, a warning, a voice urging him to rethink everything he had become. He stared at the ceiling, replaying every choice he had made, every hour he had wasted, every opportunity he had ignored. The sapphire shimmered in his mind, casting a blue glow over every thought. For the first time in his life, Ethan understood the weight of time, and he knew he could never return to who he used to be. When morning came, the snowstorm had finally passed, leaving a thick layer of ice blanketing the entire farm. Ethan stepped outside the barn and took a deep breath. The cold stung sharply as it filled his lungs, but this time he didn't mind it. The night before had changed him. It wasn't just a moral lesson, it was an awakening, a shock so powerful it reached into the deepest part of his soul and pulled him forward. He now understood that life could no longer be built on procrastination and mindlessness. Harrison opened the door and stepped out, holding a cup of hot coffee. He looked at Ethan for a long moment before saying that when a storm ends, everyone must return to their own life and responsibilities. But before Ethan left the farm, there was one more thing he wanted to say. He told Ethan that most people never get the chance to see the glow of their final sapphire. Many spend their whole lives throwing away each day without realizing its worth. Only a rare few, those lucky enough to wake up in time, truly understand what they've been wasting. He said Ethan was one of the lucky ones. The last sapphire had revealed its light before it was too late, and now Ethan's task was not to admire that moment, but to act upon it. Ethan nodded slowly. For the first time in years, he felt something bright opening inside him, something like determination. As he climbed into his truck to head home, Harrison called after him with a final reminder. He told Ethan that the remaining sapphires in his life were the days ahead, and only Ethan could decide what to do with them. It wasn't a lesson the old farmer wanted to teach. It was a lesson life had chosen to deliver through him. Back home, Ethan began living differently. He started waking up early, refusing to hit the snooze button or curl back under the blankets. He returned to his mechanical training course, and this time, he didn't postpone, a single assignment. He completed every task the day it was assigned. Concepts that once confused him now became clearer, not because they were easier, but because he was present. His mind was no longer drowning in excuses. But transformation is never smooth. In the early weeks, Ethan had to fight against himself more than anything else. There were nights when he was exhausted and tempted to slip back into old habits. There were moments when he doubted he was capable of becoming someone better. His old friends, who had passed the certification long before him, mocked his sudden change, saying he was only going through a phase and would drop everything soon, just like always. Their words stung, but they no longer crushed him the way they once did. One afternoon, while working in the training workshop, Ethan experienced a close call when a heavy metal component slipped off its stand. It nearly caused a severe accident. For a moment, time froze. The sound of the falling metal echoed in his ears like a memory, the memory of his father's fatal accident years ago. His heart pounded. He stood motionless, realizing how fragile life truly was. That near accident didn't discourage him. Instead, it reminded him that time wasn't just valuable, it was finite, and every day he wasted was a day his father would have given anything to still have. The incident strengthened Ethan's resolve. He pushed forward even harder. Months passed, and his efforts began to bear fruit. Ethan eventually passed the mechanical certification exam with near-perfect scores. Not only that, but he also received an offer for an internship at a major manufacturing facility in Texas, a rare opportunity coveted by many young trainees. When he shared the news, his mother burst into tears, tears of pride, relief, and gratitude. She hugged him tightly, saying she always believed he would find his path. She just didn't know what would finally lead him there. Ethan didn't reply. He knew the answer lay in an old wooden chest on an isolated farm. Before leaving for Texas, Ethan knew he had to visit Harrison again. He wanted to thank the old farmer who had changed his life. But when he drove up to the farm, his heart sank. An ambulance was parked outside. A neighbor rushed over to tell him that Harrison had been taken to the hospital the night before with severe heart failure. He had lived alone for so long that no one realized how sick he really was. Ethan drove straight to the hospital. When he walked into the dimly lit room, Harrison lay on the bed, frail but still carrying the same gentle strength in his eyes. Ethan took his hand, unable to hold back the emotion swelling inside him. Harrison smiled faintly and told him not to worry. He said life always comes to its final chapter, and what matters is not how long we live, but how we use the time we are given. He told Ethan he was proud of him, that he had not wasted the moment of awakening life had gifted him. He said he had nothing left to give except the old wooden chest. He told Ethan to take it and remember that inside it once lay sapphires, precious days, precious opportunities. And Ethan's responsibility was to make sure that the chest would never be empty again. Tears streamed down Ethan's face. He knew this would be their last conversation. Harrison closed his eyes gently, slipping into peace. Ethan stood by his bedside, feeling a hollow ache in his heart, but also an unwavering resolve. From that moment on, he knew he had to live not only for himself, but for the man who had handed him the key to his future. 10 years passed. Ethan Walker had become a talented engineer, with a family of his own and a life built on discipline and purpose. In his home office, the old wooden chest remained on a shelf, untouched, yet full of meaning. Each time Ethan looked at it, he remembered the storm, the sapphire, the lesson, and the man who changed his life. And with everything he had learned, Ethan wanted to share one truth with anyone listening: time never returns. Each day you're given is a sapphire in your hands. You can throw it away as if it means nothing, or you can use it to build the life you dream of. The future does not belong to those who wait. It belongs to those who act. So ask yourself, How many sapphires have you thrown away? And what will you do with the ones you still have left? Share your thoughts about this story in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next inspiring story.